talk about security and what's going on today, and it's a pretty scary thing. And we've been doing this for a long time, and security is one of those weird things where everybody believes they have to have security, but folks don't understand how much security. This is who Focus Technologies is today. We pride ourselves on helping our customers to be data driven, and the big reason behind that is because data driven organizations are outperforming their peers, right? They're winning more customers, they're developing applications faster, they're getting to whatever their business outcomes are far more frequently than customers who are not data driven. If you look at the overall cost of cybercrime to the world, it's about 10.5 trillion they're estimating by 2025. That would make it the world's third largest economy behind the US and China. So think about that for a second, right? And it's not, hey, we want to hit the Colonial Pipeline because we're a state sanctioned group. It's more of, hey, we're going to spread the net, we're going to use automation, we're going to go out and we're going to just try to execute. And if we get an environment, we're going to collect small ransomware payments to the tune of 50 grand a pop. And that stuff adds up, right? I don't know if folks saw the 60 Minutes special a few weeks back on cybercrime, but we kind of joked that was the mainstream moment for security, right? When they're talking about it on a popular program that non-IT people regularly watch, and they talked about how people who were doing 50 grand in ransomware pops at a time were making $12 to $14 million over a couple of years, right? So the net has been cast very wide. So the old "what's the big deal and nobody cares about my data" does not hold relevant anymore. It's not true, right? They just want to get at organizations, put them in a tough position, and collect some money, and then move on to the next one. So small businesses are at a much greater risk than the large enterprises, right? And we hear this a lot. Well, no one cares about me. They're going to go after the bigger guys because they have the more meaningful names. Well, that's actually not true. 71% of ransomware attacks in 2018 were on small businesses, right? And one of the statistics that really concerns us is, they were saying, I think it was last week before, they were saying 60% of US companies have already been breached. And of that 60%, some of those have been breached multiple times. So it's not like a one-time event that when you survive, you're like, okay, I don't have to worry about that again. No, it will happen again, right? Like I mentioned, a lot of this stuff is automated, so they're not even picking targets. They just randomly cast in the wide nets. And the reason why the SMBs are such easy targets is because they don't have the tools, they don't have the people, and they don't have the expertise to know what to do to protect, right? They're doing their best, but they don't have all these people who spend all day going through logs and making sure that alerts are real alerts or not real alerts, noise versus things you have to actually work on. And so they're a very easy target for these guys and gals to attack. So the other thing that we always look at is, just like on the DR side of the house, we try to understand what it means to a customer to have downtime, right? And that may or may not justify why they should have a robust or less robust disaster recovery plan, is to talk about what the costs are related to these attacks, right? And first and foremost, it can be the direct cost, right? So as I mentioned, the ransom payment itself, typically done in crypto, which is risky unto itself, right? Because you're literally depending on a criminal to be honorable, right? Now, surprisingly, most of them are, because they know that if they're not, then the whole racket's up, right? If companies start reporting, yeah, I paid the ransom and then I didn't get my stuff back, well, then people will stop paying the ransom, right? So they are relatively honorable. They have professional help desks, right, and call centers. So when you call them in, they'll be very friendly, and it'll be like you're talking to a manufacturer or a partner like us, right? When you'll be like, I can't believe I'm dealing with criminals right now. But that's just how these guys operate today, right? So the ransom payment is just the first in the cost related to potential cyber attack. The next one is downtime. So, when you think about what these attacks actually do to an infrastructure, it's not just, oh, well, it affects one application, so the rest of us keep working. No. So when we get called and somebody's been hit, the first thing you do is you install your tool sets, because you're going to do forensic analysis. You start looking at, you start going through log files. Where did the breach occur? Where did they go? Did they go lateral from there? What data did they get at? Right? You start going through all these checkdowns. And while you're doing this work, nobody can be working. right? So the company is officially down because the more people working during an incident means the wider potential for exposure to what's going on. So each company has to look at, what is their own internal cost of downtime, and considering that most of these breaches take at least a couple days on the small side to figure out what's going on before you can put a remediation plan in place, and then it takes several days to weeks to fully remediate, right? Downtime can be significant. The other one is liability, right? So, there's the issue of your own internal data and your own enforced downtime, right? And the cost of that. And that's typically what customers will buy cyber insurance to protect against, right? You'll get a cyber policy, and if you hit a breach, they'll pay you some money to cover the cost of getting yourself back online. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Depending on the data that they get access to, that's where the real liability starts. So in all these breaches, when you create kind of your risk council and you bring in a PR firm, you start evaluating what happened. One of the big questions is, how far spread is the event, and what data did they get access to? Because the real liability occurs if they get access to customer data, right? And then that customer data potentially leaks out. So let me give you a real example of an incident that we worked on. We got called in to an account. They had been breached. We did the analysis. We found out they had gotten in through a older firmware on a firewall. Once they are in, they wiggle their way around. They started moving laterally. They identified the production. They identified other assets in the environment. And what typically we've seen is they go after backups as well, and they delete out or zero out those backups first. Then they encrypt the production, because now the customer is in a position of pain, right? You can't restore your data from backup because your backups have been deleted. And the only way to get your production back is to pay the ransom to get the keys to unencrypt. So in this case, the customer had immutable copies or air-gapped backup. So they're like, oh, we're going to be okay. We can restore the backups. Well, unfortunately, the forensic analysis showed that that's not true. The bad actors actually got customer data. And so when, during the conversations with the bad guys and these call centers I was referencing earlier, they said, well, fine, you think you can restore the data? That's great. So no big deal, but we got your customer data. So either you pay us and we'll give you the customer data back, or you don't pay us and we release all this data on the dark web. And now, to my point earlier, the liability to that customer goes through the roof, right? So, liability is a huge cost, not just internally, but what data do you have that they get access to? Of course, indirect cost is always there, data loss, right? I know of a customer that got breached, backups were zeroed out. They made the decision not to pay the ransom because they were really nervous about negotiating with criminals, which I don't hold against them. They chose to rebuild from scratch. So they had to go based on knowledge in people's heads, right? And we talk about this when it comes to disaster recovery, right? It becomes an accounts payable, accounts receivable, right? The people that owe you money aren't going to come and tell you, hey, by the way, I owe you money. The people that you owe money will certainly come and say, hey, by the way, you owe me money. So trying to piece those things back together can be a real bear. And at least on the DR side of the house, there was a stat that used to travel around that would say well over 50% of organizations that suffer a major data loss in the mid-market go out of business, right? There's just no way to continue operations. So data loss is clearly something to be careful about. And then, of course, reputation loss. Like I mentioned before, there's been so many attacks this year, and that's only a third of the attacks that have happened, because 2/3 of the attacks that have occurred don't get reported. People don't want to talk to the FBI. They don't want people to know. They just want to pay the ransom and go on their way like nothing ever happened, because there is a price to pay for reputation loss as well. Right? Nobody wants to know that their data is sitting with a company who's been breached, right? And think about our personal lives, right? When a retail operation or a credit monitoring, someplace like that gets hit, we get notices in the mail. Oh, I got to get you another card. Oh, I got to do this, right? It alters how you think about where you spend your money, where you put your personal information after those events, right? So that's another one of the things that we all have to consider when it comes to these attacks. And here is why it's so difficult today, right? So we start with data. And our whole goal as companies is we're working with data. Some of it's our data, some of it's partners' data. right? And we're working with this data, and there's lots of people using this data, and they're using lots of different endpoints. Used to be simple. You'd go to work at 8 in the morning, you'd sit down at your desktop and you'd work, you'd leave at 5 o'clock, and you had no access data anymore. Right? You literally were tied to your desk. Well, that's not how it works anymore, right? Especially after COVID, people are working from everywhere, right? So we've all these devices, all these people, and we are naturally a social bunch as humans. And so we use email, right? And so email is a common place that the bad guys try to get at us, right? Through these spear phishing attacks, through these links, right? They put in there that will download malware, etc. We use the internet, we use the web for information, we use the web for sharing data, right? And so that's another place where you have to be careful because you can download bad things, from different websites. And of course, there's still the one that people, kind of minimize, but I've seen it happen time and time again, the social engineering side of the house, where, you call somebody up and you say, listen, this is IT and your account's been compromised. I need you to give me your username, your password immediately so we can protect your data. And people do. They give those people on the phone their username and password, and now you've been compromised. So these are just some of the challenges today with our environments. And of course, the bad guys and gals are no longer just the young, rebellious people trying to see what they can get away with. We're now talking about state-sponsored, right? The Chinese and North Koreans, the Eastern Europeans, aka the Russians, etc. Right? It's actually big business in some of these countries. People who are taking part in these fields of cyber terrorism actually think they have normal, respectable jobs. They think, hey, listen, this is what I do every day. I get up in the morning, I work on this call center, I get paid good money, and we're basically teaching people a lesson for not having good security. So they've definitely upped the game. So, back in the day, we'd put a nice firewall around all this and say, I'm keeping the bad guys out and protected. Well, that's not the case anymore, as your data is out in the cloud, your data is out at the edge, and your data is in everybody's house, since everybody basically went remote, right, back last year around March timeframe. So how do we at Focus approach this problem, and how do we help our customers? Well, first and foremost, we take a layered approach, right? And that layered approach starts with, simple things like developing a cyber program, right, or a security program, and creating your policy and procedure, right? And this can be as simple as saying, hey, listen, we provide wireless internally to our employees, right? And they get on this wireless network. But you know what? Anybody who's not an employee, anybody who's a contractor, anybody who's a visitor, right, they have to get on a separate guest network. Right? So they can never be traveling across the same segments as the actual employees, meaning they do not have access to any of our applications, our data, etc. Right? So silly little things like that, that's all part of developing a cyber program. Right? Who should have access to what data, when, and from where? We look into how you're going to handle incident response in the event of a breach. It's a lot like writing a will, right? None of us want to do it, but it's important, right? You have to plan for the unexpected horrific event that your time may be up. Same with attacks, right? You have to say, you know what, in the event that this happens, how are we going to respond, right? Who are we going to work with? Do we want to go out and get a retainer from somebody? Now, I've seen people push back on retainers. Look, the good thing about retainers is when you sign a retainer with a company, they'll understand your environment up front, and when you call them with an incident, they're already a little bit ahead of the game, right? The other thing is, if you look at the industry, when you're under retainer, your rate for incident response is going to be much less than when you call somebody not on retainer and say, Rome is burning, I need help, right? Well, then you're going to pay the unexpected, very high incident response hourly rate, right? So we always advise our clients to understand their risk as part of developing this program and decide for themselves whether they want to engage in some kind of incident response retainer or whether they want to just roll the dice. The other side of that is remediation, right? How are we going to handle implementing the changes need to be implemented, the fixes need to be put in place after we understand what's happened as part of the IR. Once you've built that program and you know what you want to protect against, and why you have to protect, which comes down to regulatory stuff in some cases, or just good security foundation in others, it's time to bring in the tools to actually execute the policy. This is something that we've struggled with in IT, right? There are lots of tools out there. People buy best of breed this, best of breed that. And then what we end up with is an effectiveness issue in the industry. You had all the right tools, you had all the right alerts, but nobody had the ability to rationalize all those alerts or filter through and figure out what's noise and what's real, right? So it's important to understand first what you need to protect against and why, and then to put the right tools in place to do that. So that can be next-gen firewalls, that can be web application firewalls, that can be endpoint protection, right, which we'll talk in a little bit more detail about in a few minutes. And then the one that a lot of companies overlook, especially in the mid-market, and that's really visibility, right? This you may talk about SIMs, you may hear people talk about SOCs, right? Security Operations Centers, right? This is really where we start talking about, even though I have all these tools configured, you should still be watching, you should still be looking for patterns, right? And understanding when things that aren't normal are occurring in your environment. You could also be looking at things like vulnerability management, which is proactively hunting in your environment for known threats. One of our partners in the security operations space that we bring in to provide this as a service to our customers, when they do their onboardings, their statistic is 70% of the customers they onboard have latent threats already out there. They're sitting in the environment that haven't been activated yet, right? Back to my point about the bad guys spread a wide net, right? A lot of these things are just automated, right? And then it's a matter of them getting to you as they go through their massive lists of potential places where their tools are sitting and they can activate them and initiate an attack, right? So we have to be watching what's going on in these environments to make sure when stuff goes bad, we can limit the damage really quickly. The other thing we have to do is educate users. This is a pretty interesting space, right? So, our colleague, Billy Smelter, who's our chief strategy officer here, likes to say that, at home, if you have, locks on all your windows and doors, and you've got an alarm system, and you've got Ring video cameras, and your whole property is Fort Knox, that's fantastic. But if somebody comes up, rings a doorbell, and your kid walks over and opens the door, all bets are off, right? And that's kind of what it's like in corporate America when it comes to IT security. We can put all the tools in place we want to, but if we don't educate our users, they're going to click the link, right? They're going to let the bad guys in. They're going to do things that are going to cause us lots of pain. So the educating users thing is not just a one-time event. It's a regular communication. What's happening when threats exist? Here's the threat. Here's what we need you to not do or do, right? If you see this, for example, we here at Focus have gotten emails that say they're from our CEO, right? But if you hover over the CEO's name, it's actually not his email, right? So we've got people trying to get at us that way, and they're asking silly things like, hey, I need to do this and this for a customer. Can you, send this or buy that or do this, right? These are not uncommon. Our customers see the same stuff, right? We need to make sure end users know how to validate these things, right? How to do a simple check, like hover over and check what the email is, right? And stuff like that. So the training is not just that kind of stuff. It's also testing, right? It's sometimes sending out links and seeing who clicks on it. And then, those people have to go through the training again to make sure that they understand, not to click on stuff, right? So there's all sorts of stuff that we can do to train end users, but it has to be part of a company's plan and approach to security. And then finally, even when you have 1 through 5 covered, you still have to do some kind of regular validation, right? Those can be pen tests, those can be attack simulations. There's lots of different ways to continue to test your environment, but you have to continue to make sure that the stuff is working according to how you want it to work based on your policy and procedure, because this is a game of leapfrog, right? As quickly as we close all the holes, the bad guys find new holes, right? So you have to stay ahead of this thing, and that's why we always tell customers you'll never be 100% protected. Anybody that tells you that is lying. You can get into the 90th percentile, and that's pretty good considering what's going on today. So the next question we get a lot from our customers is, okay, well, this sounds interesting to me, and based on where they are in terms of their security maturity, they say, well, where do we start? And so we always say that starts with requirements, right? What are your internal requirements? Do you have any regulations you have to abide by? Do you need to be SOX compliant, HIPAA compliant, NIST, CMMC? Tell us what your requirements are first. And if you have those, then we'll match everything we do to those requirements. If you don't know where you want to start, then we're going to recommend NIST. And the reason we're going to do that is because NIST is one of the most transferable of all the regulations. So, if you think about HIPAA and you think about CMMC, right, you think about SOC, they will all reference NIST and say, if you meet NIST, blah, 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 then you satisfy our controls here, right? And so we always recommend we start with NIST. But to simplify it a little further, I'm going to hand it over to Greg, and he's going to walk you through the Focus Technology Security Wheel, and then how one of our partners, Cisco, fits into the mix.
Hey everybody, nice to meet you all virtually, I guess. So this the Focus Security Foundation Security Wheel is just something that we here at Focus use to try and break down the different categories of potential security risk and basically where your exposure is. So in the interest of time, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just run through this wheel, with the eye of what our Cisco partnership allows us to provide using Cisco tools and Focus's expertise. I won't go too deep into details on each individual piece. If you guys have any questions or you want to dive into anything deeper, just please go ahead and leave a question in the chat and we can definitely loop in. But just to give you an overview, so Cisco has pretty much every point on this wheel covered with one of their different security applications. If we roll down, starting up at multi-factor authentication, which if you're not familiar with it, it's basically a technology to prove that you are the user who you say you are. It's something you know and something you have. So typically it's your username and password and maybe an application on your phone. Cisco Duo is the product that can meet that need. It's a flexible and scalable product that it's got a bunch of different subscription levels that can do everything from basic multi-factor authentication, scaling all the way up to single sign-on. So fantastic product, really excels in that category. MDR and MR, so managed detection and response and managed response. So Cisco has a couple of different ways, and there's some overlap in some of these categories here. So yeah, you'll hear me mention a couple of products and a couple of different categories, but Cisco has a managed detection and response services offering. That's how they handle this piece number one. They also have a service called Stealth Watch, which is a subscription service as well that lets them sort of extend into that area. The offering from Cisco, it combines an elite team of researchers, investigators, responders with the integrated threat intelligence, which is where Stealth Watch comes in, and Talos, to contain threats faster while really just giving you guys the relevant information that you need to get a prioritized response for the breach or the issue in question. When we talk about endpoint protection, that's one of the areas of overlap along with MDR and MR. So Cisco has, they have a couple of great products here. They have the Cisco Umbrella product, which you're probably familiar with. It offers you protection at the DNS level. In addition to protection at the DNS level, it can also protect you against allowing data exfiltration from your clients. It can detect if you're on the network, off the network. On top of that, Cisco also has the Secure Endpoint product, which used to be called AMP. If you're familiar with AMP from the past, it provides really both EDR and XDR capabilities in one package. EDR is endpoint detection and response. That's your threat hunting and your endpoint isolation. XDR is the extended detection and response. That piece is provided by Cisco's SecureX Platform, which I'll talk about as we wrap this up on the next slide. But the combination here helps you find the sophisticated attacks faster, and it maps the attacks and the traffic patterns right down towards the actual exploits that are potentially being used against your staff and organization. Next up is secure email. So Cisco has a wide variety of secure email appliances. This is the type of appliance that you would be able to use to send encrypted email to make sure that what you're trying to communicate stays encrypted and secure and is only between you and your extended party. In addition, the product offering also will scan the contents of email to assist with data exfiltration prevention. So you can prevent certain emails from being sent with certain keywords that you decide are important to your organization. It'll also proactively scan inbound email as well for malware and your typical antiviruses. So, the Cisco Secure Email is truly a secure email offering and appliance. When it comes to firewalls, Cisco's got the next gen and cloud firewall options covered. There's a couple of different lines that they have. For the cloud series, there's cloud native firewalls that you can place in your AWS or Azure instance. For on-prem, you can get the Cisco Firepower series or the Cisco ASA series. Those come in both virtual or physical. They're your traditional next generation firewall products. They have a wide variety of offerings and tools that we could spend an entire presentation talking about. But suffice it to say, it's your typical edge protection, in addition to your remote access through a secure VPN client as well. When it comes to Ethernet switching and wireless, it's really that's one of the most critical components of your infrastructure. It's where all your workstations are tied in. Either they're plugged into a connection or they're attached to the wireless. There's a concept in security. It's called zero trust. It basically means, you will provide zero access to any device that you don't fully trust. Cisco has a great tool here, to meet this need for both Ethernet switching and wireless. It's Cisco ISE, Identity Services Engine. It's a network access control package. It will profile your workstations. It can decide what your workstations are allowed to get to on the network. It can allow you to create bring your own device policies. So if you have users that bring their own devices in, you don't have to give them access to your entire network if they plug into any connection, which is typically the case in a lot of organizations. So really, it's just another level of protection and visibility into your environment. Finally, on this wheel here, we come into secure backup. Business continuity, it takes on a whole new meaning when data is the lifeblood of your business. Larry went into some details about, the importance of protecting your data, the importance of air gapping. Cisco, through its third-party partnerships, has offerings that, can basically scale from small business all the way up to data center, for protecting, air gapping your data and your backup solution. Lastly, not on the slide here, but before I move on to the last slide, Cisco WebEx, we can't move on without mentioning WebEx. It's the platform we're bringing you today's discussion on. Cisco WebEx brings you calling, meetings, messaging, events in the cloud. It's for teams of all sizes. The things to keep in mind when you're looking at something like this is it's flexible, so it can work on any number of appliances, whether it's a laptop, a cell phone, a tablet. It's inclusive, which means, no matter what device you're on, as long as you have connectivity, you get the same experience and the same level of quality, in your communications. And it's secure. I mean, the product is secure by design. It's private by default, and it's built to defend against threats, no matter where you're working. It's the application that when you're doing remote sessions with users, you can feel confident in sharing credentials in the chat window, because everything is encrypted, from an end-to-end standpoint. Lastly, tying everything together is Cisco's SecureX platform. Cisco SecureX, it's a cloud-native built-in platform that connects all of the Cisco security portfolio products that we just talked about with your infrastructure. It really lets you radically reduce dwell time and cut down on typically laborious tasks that would typically take people a long time to sort of get through. It provides orchestration to allow the automation of routine tasks via workflows that you can build out. You can use custom ones that you create yourself. You can use the series of templates that ship with the product if they align with your organizational needs. It helps with threat response, because with something like SecureX orchestrating your overall security platform, it really helps you accelerate the threat investigations by aggregating and correlating not only all the information from the different pieces of the Cisco security profile, but also from the global threat intelligence resources like StealthWatch or Cisco Talos. It can collate all of that information and give you this easy to view dashboard that you see on the screen here, to be able to quickly parse through incidents and issues that you see up here. And that's really where the unified visibility comes from, or it comes into play. So ordinarily with the prior products, you would have to log into each product to get visibility into what's going on. You can see with the Cisco SecureX dashboard, it's a little blurry on the screen, I'm sure, but you can see that it's a great overview of all the different applications.
Any concerns? If you'd like us to actually get engaged and talk more about the wheel, for everybody who joined today's call, we're going to offer up a free security wheel assessment. When we meet with you, we go through the wheel, we talk about your environment, we talk about what we can do to help you get into the 90th percentile protected against all the attacks that are going on today. So with that, thank you very much, everybody, and have a great night.